Request all the members here to stand for the ICA motto song, please. Thank you. A very good afternoon to one and all present here. I'd like to welcome you to the CPE study circle meeting that we have today on governance, risk and compliance. As you all are aware, data, the word data itself is today the in topic. Most companies that are valued so high, you take the Facebooks, you take the Twitter, you take LinkedIn, all these social media companies, they are among the top 20 biggest companies in the world. Google. So why are these companies among the top 20? What has changed? Because you look at 15 years back, it was mostly manufacturing companies or service oriented companies or banks. But suddenly in the last 15 years there's been a revolutionary change where you suddenly have companies which have not in the traditional model of business that have come to the forefront. Mostly you can call them advertising companies. Suddenly these are the biggest companies in the world. I think the key trigger of the change has been the way data is used, how data is mined today. So most valuable companies are the ones which have data about people, data about trends, data about what you buy, what you sell, how you browse, what you use. So almost on a daily basis, almost on a hourly and every second, these apps or these softwares are tracking what you are doing. If you are on the phone, and I actually tested this out, I was basically talking about US, California with my wife. I just mentioned California discussions. And after a couple of hours, I started getting targeted advertisements by Facebook and all saying, do you want to fly to US? Tickets from Chennai to California. Like that I started getting advertisements. So I have not gone and searched voluntarily. They are listening in. Whether it is right or wrong is a different argument. But the fact of the matter is today, this data is priceless. Because when data is used effectively, not only can they advertise to you, but it will also be useful for you in terms of understanding what is coming to you. Now, this sea change of data is slowly expanding. While earlier it was restricted to only advertisement basis, today it is growing into various spheres. Today politics and elections are decided based on data. And this is obviously going to come into the sphere of chartered accountants as well. It has always been there, probably not accessible as it is today, but you will find that monitoring data, analyzing data, and mining the data and getting the effective resources. It is after all garbage in, garbage out. So you have to get the data, analyze it effectively, or have a software that parses through the right information to get out the most effective results. So your final report or your final deliverable will help not only you, but it will help your clients as well. And this data, when you tie it with governance, risk and compliance, it obviously becomes a deadly combination. Because today, risk, as chartered accountants we are all aware, is growing higher and higher. So effective usage of data will help you identify the risks earlier point it out to your clients earlier, and maybe even save our own skins in the process. So today we have with us a very experienced speaker on this topic, a friend of mine. I happened to have my first interaction with him, as we were just discussing, was at a restaurant very late at night, and he is such a dynamic person. Even in that time, he was constantly discussing about business and what he was doing. He's a very passionate individual and someone who really loves his job. We have, please give a warm welcome to CAM Aditya. I will read out his profile in brief. CA Aditya is a chartered accountant and a certified information system auditor, a CISA. He is a first generation entrepreneur and a strategy partner. He heads the risk and business advisory services and the value through IT governance verticals of his firm. He landscapes the white space opportunities for the firm. He's a risk professional with around 10 years of experience in this field, and he does a lot of delivery and support for the clients as well, and risk-based internal audits, fraud risk assessments, process documentation, streamlining engagements and others. Aditya is also a trainer and speaker on various topics pertaining to protection of information assets, IT governance, and he regularly conducts training programs for organizations on various topics in this field. He is a CA, a Bachelor of Commerce, a CISA. He is a strategy management expert. He helps in assessing organizations' infrastructures with, across various industries. He's also an assessed SAP implementation expert, a data migration expert, a risk-based internal audit expert, risk-based concurrent audit expert as well. And the list goes on. He is the appropriate person to tackle this topic. He's very young, he's very dynamic, and I have no doubt he'll have a wonderful session today. And thank you for taking time out of your schedule to be here, Mr. Aditya. Without further ado, I request our speaker, CA Aditya, to address the dignitaries here today.
Thank you, Abhishek, for the more than kind introduction. If I can just request all of you to come a little bit, to the front, it would kind of help. Thank you so much. So, what we'll do today is let me just landscape this topic. In fact, Abhishek got this very beautifully and explained it in a very brief and lucid manner. So what we will be looking at is how do we understand data. I would be very glad if we can do this in an interactive way, because a lot of monotonous talking would make it very theoretical, and would also make you wonder if it's really possible to kind of do this and monetize this. That's the most important thing, right? So that's why we are all here. The large part of the agenda that we're going to look at is being split into 3 parts. So setting up of what we are looking at, that's what we'll be looking into to begin with. But largely, we're going to look at the concept of data within the framework of governance, risk and compliance. Why is this a topic of relevance today is what we're going to look at. Governance would be a very simple word, but it is over-embarking in the sense that it includes a lot of things, right? And similarly, risk is beaten to death in today's world. And compliance is, of course, an animal which is very difficult to assess in this country, because there's so many laws and regulations. By the time you figure out how many regulations and laws that are there, you wouldn't be able to kind of count it with 2 hands. Let me just step back a little bit, get out of the whole concept of data, and just ask a few questions before we get into this topic. Let's get into the idea of what do you think is the most important invention that man has ever made? There are no negative marks you can speak. Most important invention that man has ever made.
Fire.
Sorry?
Fire.
Yes, it's fire. Why is it fire? Why is it fire?
That fire wouldn't have been able to get into industry and then start
One second. What can we pass on the mic, the smaller mic? If I caught you right, ma'am, I think fire, what it did was, what was about 12 hours of time that man had became 24 hours, because he could do something overnight, right? It increased productivity of an individual. Wheel, again, she said, is important because it took the human race to kind of move spaces within a shorter span of time. So things like that. So across your spectrum of life, there have been a lot of things that have accelerated the growth of the human beings, right? So in this context, we're going to look at a few important timelines for the topic that we have. Why do you think 1960 is probably very relevant? Sorry? You can speak in the mic? So 1960, is it working? Below. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. Hello. Yeah.
This framework,
Yeah, the internet. ARPA, right? Your ARPANET came for the first time in 1960. That was the first very lucid form of internet that came into being. And what about the next year, 1990? Anybody can take a guess? Sorry?
.com company?
Not really, in the sense that was probably the age when the computers got busy. You had the first supercomputer in 1970s, 1950, 1970 got the upgrade version, and then in 1990 is a time when a lot of relevance came into the idea of a computer and access. And what would be 2004? YouTube, Facebook, right? So the concept of a generation is defined by the inventions that we make. Today, a generation passes when you make a very significant invention. So within the concept of data, right, each of these time scales make a huge difference. In 1960, I had access to global information. I could see something. How fast is irrelevant. 1990 is when I could probably use the development of computers in a more scaled manner. 1950 is of course when the first supercomputer was invented, but 1970 it kind of stabilized. But it took a good 20 years to kind of mass scale this. So 1990 more or less defined access. 2004 kind of encompassed a huge generation, because we belong to a generation where we have used the brick Nokia phone, right, as well as a smartphone at the same time. So 2004, when YouTube came in, right, what it did largely was make information available very fast. You could stream, the first time you could hear videos being streamed across the internet. And then Facebook came in, I think 2005, this is probably the timeline, when you had social networks coming in, right? So that again made data available, made data very relevant in the sense that people could study the population a lot better. And again, 2017 is a very important milestone. Can someone guess what it would be largely? Blockchain is earlier, but what would be interesting to see is IoT, Internet of Things. Yeah, Internet of Things is something that it's still in progress. Your industry is not really picked up in a lot of ways, but that's a new concept a lot of companies are looking at. So Internet of Things is where you can automate and characterize your behavior and automate your entire life, in the sense that if you're tuned to 22 degrees Celsius of weather, your AC can be auto-tuned according to your performance, your body's temperature and things like that. So that's a more recent concept. But across all these timelines, what definitely happened was a generation passed, a generation or two maybe, in my opinion. So these timescales would have a lot of relevance to also the kind of information that we need to have access to as well, as auditors as well. So when I did my first internal audit of sorts, what I first did was take the trial balance, look at movements, take vouchers, tick, yes, green, red, everything got done. So now when we start looking at internal audit, there's a lot of preparatory work that goes into it, right? So, what is the most significant risk today an auditor holds, in my opinion, would be the risk of not seeing a particular information, right? So, what does that lead us into? What should the focus be on then? Can someone tell me what should be the real focus should be?
First get the overall picture, landscape first.
Yeah.
Materials.
And if you can talk in the mic, yeah?
No, I think one has to first get the entire landscape first.
Right.
Then get into
You forget about the process. You tell me what is the most important thing today for an auditor to ensure that he minimizes, I'm not saying completely overlaps and does away with it, minimizes the risk of not seeing a particular information which he has to see as part of an audit. Because today, we as professionals, we don't have the time, right? We have only a certain amount of limited time that we can kind of give to a particular client. But what is most important for me is I have to see the relevant information during that time. I should not be scoring through information records and forever. So it's not going to help. So we as auditors have a specific role to play in picking your samples, right? So that's the most important thing today for me. What is the risk of an information that you have to see that has been picked up is actually the relevant population of what you want to see. That's the most important decision that anybody has to make in our profession right now. So again, what defines your sample? Your sample is defined by the population of data that you hold, right? So in this context, what kind of data that you pick? Today, your data is not only a specific trial balance or a profit and loss account or balance sheet. No, it's not. There are a lot more information that is getting done, right? So we'll sort of get into it one by one. But what I also hope to achieve during this thing is we'll be looking at a couple of case studies in terms of what we do in a very real space of work. One would probably be looking at procurement as an area of audit, but how do I pick my data and what are the relevant data points that we need to look at is one thing that I would run you through. The second one is if I have a data science project, right? What am I looking at? Today a possible automation scenario, what kind of data that you collect. So let's look at these two case scenarios rather than just talking theories, right? So this is my favorite quote: "The greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence; it's to act with yesterday's logic." Right? The problems that we face today are this is by Peter Drucker, a very famous economist. So today we as professionals have to adapt to the tools and the information that are available to look at the same kind of problems that have been there all along. It's not changed. It's the mechanisms and the tools and the volume of information that you're looking at has significantly, increased. But you as a human being has only that limited time of 24 hours. So how well you make use of that time to arrive at the same objectives that you have all along. The timing is what the most important thing is. So what do we almost never hear about? What data actually is, how is it represented, and what is the access that is there for the data, right? So when we do an audit, these are the three things probably we may not look at, but we have to look at. So this decides what is the representation of the population that I have, what is the ethos of the company as well. For example, if somebody has access to data, that tells you about the company. It gives you a general direction in terms of how the company views the importance of data within the enterprise, right? So these are aspects that we should always kind of look at before we start something. So what has changed? So I have the information footprint today across all your probably your financial representations out there. Today you are bound by so many softwares and tools, right? It could be ERPs, it could be accounting, software packages, it doesn't matter. And one of the key things that we notice across, especially with cost being a significant driver, right? Affordabilities of ERPs today are much better. What was the cost of SAP, somebody being on SAP earlier, and today this is significantly different. Today SAP has come down to an extent where you have subscription models for SAP. So its affordability has increased a lot, right? But what has also happened is because of these affordabilities, you have a lot of these tools running around the organization. You have to interface all these tools, right? So it becomes very critical for an auditor to understand the landscape of the packages and the tools and the software and the IT architecture that is there, right? Before we start any audit, I would probably be interested in what kind of data that I can source from all these, packages that are available. So let me just quickly go into an example here. So if, say, for example, you're looking at human resources as an area of audit, right? What would be the data that you would be interested in, right? Which is not financial data. Tell me about non-financial data that you would be interested in if you're looking at human resources.
Personal record.
Sorry?
The personnel record.
Personal record, employee masters, right? That's what you're looking at. Excellent. What else? Employee turnovers. Excellent. What else? What other information that you think is non-financial? When I say non-financial, I mean it's not available in your financial packages that are there. Like your Tally or your SAP, maybe SAP is an ERP, but you can sort of guess what kind of information is not available that you would really be interested in looking at.
Qualification.
Sorry?
Qualification, leadership qualities.
Maybe, yeah,
So probably the background checks performed. That's a part of it.
that's true.
Yeah.
Background checks. What else?
Future needs.
Okay. You mean to say career timelines and things like that?
No, what the organization needs in future. I have to make an assessment of how many more people are going to
Fair enough. So now let me bring some context to this. Let's hit the topic on the top of it. So there is governance, risk and compliance, right? So give me one example in human resources in all three. So what you said, probably personal information, is sensitive personally identifiable information, SPDI, right? That could come under compliance, right? Risk could be employee turnovers. That data could fall under risk. You're looking at a specific risk when you want to achieve that. Employee masters, again, you're looking at access, right? Who has access to employee masters and things like that. What would be governance in terms of employee, human resources? Is what kind of budget? What is the reporting that is there? What is the free flow of ombudsmen and principles that you run across, governance and things like that? Would anybody be interested in timesheets?
Yeah.
Timesheets? Is it coming from a financial package? No, not really, right? So you could have a biometric device which gathers information. And generally, if you look at most of these companies, these biometric devices are kind of unknown. It's given by a vendor who's probably not very well known. So these biometric devices, right? You'll be surprised to know that all your payroll is getting processed through that biometric device. And if you go and see, your access will be sitting with an IT admin. It's quite scary. And what they can do is probably also change the time scale. Say, for example, the significant risk that holds is today 9 a.m. is your office. Somebody comes in at 9:15, there is probably an organization policy, right, to kind of say that these guys have to be caught and told that look, you need to come on time. So say for example your IT admin decides to make the time clock as 9:15, these guys will never get reported, right? So this is a significant risk. And the second one is today somebody comes in at 9:15 but your IT admin goes and changes it at 9 o'clock in your report that comes through. So these are all the risks that we need to look at. So this is where an interface comes in. So you need to see whether your biometric device is interfaced with your application so that there is no human intervention in between. And the information that comes through is seamless. And the information that comes through is to a person of authority and relevance. Right? It should not go to your IT admin. It should come probably to someone in HR. Right? Things like that. So what this has done is it has changed the concept for us as well in terms of how we see audits. So here what I have done is we have kind of looked at a set of things that are relevant across the framework of an IT architecture. So in terms of a business logic, intranet, development and maintenance, IT infrastructure, controls and things like that. How many of you are aware of COBIT, COSO, your COSO framework? So your COBIT basically tells you certain control objectives for IT. right? Your COBIT basically also governs and tells you what are all your, how your IT has to be aligned to business, right? So there will be business goals and there will be IT goals. So what you see on the blue across the spectrum is basically your control objective. So I have to manage business risk, compliance, continuity, optimization, again compliance with internal policies and things like that. But across this, we as auditors, beyond the financial realm of business, you have a certain set of responsibilities to look at all these aspects as well. One common example again that I would give here is, say for example, any ERP has been implemented in any of your clients today. During the course of whether you're a statutory auditor or an internal auditor, it doesn't matter. You have to take a certain comfort from the nature and the level of implementation that has been done across the spectrum of the organization. So when you do that, right, what becomes important is the control tab that is there. What are my input controls, what are my processing controls, and what are my output controls? So you can probably pitch to your client saying that, look, I can look at the application controls and I can give you a fairly good comfort in terms of how it has been implemented. So that's again a monetizing opportunity. And similarly, another interesting thing, I don't know how many of you know this, if say for example any of your clients are traders, type 2 or type 3 brokers under SEBI's framework definition, then you have an opportunity to go and do an IT audit for them. So it could be any company, but that company is trading, through an API or whatever it is. So if they do their own investments and they do their own, trading within the organization with their funds, today SEBI mandates an IT audit for them. So there is an opportunity there as well. So these things have been put in place largely to look at the relevance and the confidentiality, integrity and availability of data within the enterprise, right? So in the context of all the things that I've told you now, right, the way that you look at information, the way you look at probably opportunities have changed as well, right? Let's look at data. Basically, there are two types of data that I'm really interested in. One is quantitative and one is qualitative, right? Quantitative data is numbers, test counting, measuring, whatever it could be. Your qualitative data is basically, images, observations, conversations, photographs, and things like that. Have any of you used probably images as a data source for your audits so far? Images.
Charts, graphs.
Yeah, that's one way. If I have to say, if images in terms of your audit evidence, what would be an example of it?
Inventory, something to do with the inventory.
Right, your CCTV footages, right? Another interesting thing that we really observed was inventory that you brought up, right? So you have storage facilities and warehouses across. So once we had a look at the CCTV, footages across for a manufacturing plant, and we figured out that as per the standards, there are certain specific conspicuous places where you have to have CCTVs mandatorily, like for example restrooms, right? We found out that they had not implemented it as well. So these are things that you can look at. These could be real value additions for your client. Sorry? Not near the restroom, the entrance to it. You're not inside the restroom. So this is largely a security incident from happening. So they have an incident response team in case of anything coming up. So these are things that you can look at. And in inventory, when you say it's relevant because the people monitor the people who have access to your warehouses, people coming in and going out. You have, especially if there is a vendor or third-party dependency for managing your warehouses, right? You need to know what they are taking out. So things like that, you can actually look at it and treat images as audit evidence. Data collection techniques could be observation, test surveys, document analysis, and master data and transaction data. This is largely things that you would probably would know. How many of you are aware of mystery shopping? Yeah, excellent. Can someone, if you can tell me what mystery shopping is, largely, in terms of, give me an example.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Mystery shopping is when, say let's say a retail store in a mall wants to have a particular, what do you call it?
any check to go in and
I mean, just wants to be aware how the product is being serviced or how the
Excellent.
staff is behaving. So I'm a mystery shopper. I go, I do have I go to the shop in the mall
right.
and walk around, and then I pretend to be shopping, or I could be
Yeah.
shopping also, and then I come back and submit.
That makes excellent. See, for example, you want to know product behavior. You have a competitor, right? Classic example. You have Mr. Modi's government have told us within 59 minutes you'll get a loan, right? That's what they've said, right? So now, if I'm a bank, I'll be terrified with it, because today none of the banks are able to give you a loan in 59 minutes. Trust me. So what they ideally did, I know a couple of banks who did this, was they went and posed as a customer and saw whether they could get a loan in 59 minutes. So then what they figured out is, in 59 minutes you get an informal sanction. That is, they do a basic check and you get an informal sanction. But the real act of getting that money takes 2.5 to 3 months later. In the sense that they ask for your financial information, there are property verifications, valuations and all that happen. So this is a type of audit where you can actually go and pose as someone. If you're doing a hotel internal audit, what you really want to do is just go pose as a customer, take a room and try to walk out without paying, see what happens. So these are ways in which you can be really intuitive and probably figure out something in the process as well. So there are different ways and means by which you can collect data. So, but what we are mostly interested in is this slide, between precision and accuracy of data, right? What is precision and what is accuracy? Accuracy of data is basically what it talks about. It's the truth, it's the ultimate truth. What data that you've taken is actually correct. That's all you're interested in. Precision of data is your observation in terms of what you wanted out of the data. Have you measured it correctly? Say for example, when you look at data, you have a certain objective of looking at it, right? If you're looking at human resources, you want to know whether a particular employee has worked without a leave being taken in the last 1 year. This is a way that you want to look at, probably see rotation of duties are done within the organization or not, right? So that is an objective. The precision of your data is something that you define, and the accuracy of data is the absolute truth. So when you yield a result is when your precision and accuracy are absolutely together. Sometimes you can be correct in terms of data, but what you want is not objectively defined, so you keep moving here and there. Sometimes you know what you want, but you don't know how to take the data, right? Classic example in many cases, it might be rudimentary when I say this, but one example could be you want to know whether purchase order has been approved by a particular relevant authority as per your delegation of authority metrics. You know that this is a problem, but you don't know how to take that data from the system. It's a very real situation today. Not a lot of people know this. And it was also dependent on the ERP package that is there. Say for example, if it's an accounting package called Tally, right? How would you see this? Are there ways to see this? You know, is there an audit trail? Because audit trail is a very questionable thing in the ERP. So these are the things that you know you'll probably be interested in looking at. So what is the most important thing that we generally look at in terms of any audit before we start is, we get our precision absolutely right, and we absolutely document the data that we want, so that I know where to get it. It has to be accurate, it has to be representative of what you want. Now, to just give you an overview of the data analysis methodology, we'll just go into it a bit in detail much later, but this is probably the life cycle that we generally use. We are first interested in looking at your business needs, right? First you want to know why you need a particular set of data, right? So once you know this, you can work towards achieving what you want out of it. Then you do the data understanding, the preparation and the analysis and the validation and the visuals and the presentation, right? I'm going to share this presentation. I mean, you can look into this much later, but I don't want to go a lot into theory in this. But what I would be really interested in is when you understand, a particular business requirement. Abhishek said, Facebook, right? I don't know if you guys have tried this. If you see a particular ad in Facebook, right, you can actually go and click the tab. There will be a small, wording underneath it which will say, why am I seeing this? That's exactly what they call it. You can actually go and click on it, right? And it basically tells you why you're seeing that ad. It could be probably you are about 25 years of age, you're married, and you are looking at, that's the criteria in terms of why you see that ad. So today Facebook discloses this. Why they disclose this is something that we'll come to this later, but today availability of data is there across all platforms, so anybody can kind of look at this. Another classic example would be, you have these OCR readers. I don't know if you're aware of it, a lot of vendors are there across, wherein a lot of companies give physical documents and they convert it into OCR format, as in they just read this, type this into an OCR format and send it back to the client, wherein the client uploads it into their ERP system in the relevant format. So today information is going out, so the ability for a vendor to sell this information is always going to be there. So he's going to see how I'm going to make money out of this, right? So what is it in the, why am I saying this? What is in it for you guys in this? So probably if you see a vendor dependency in a particular client place where information is going out and they're data entering it and coming back again, you can look at data governance, data compliance. What am I looking at? Data compliance today, she said SPDI, right? Sensitive Personally Identifiable Information. You have the data privacy bill, you have the GDPR that's coming in. So there's a lot of focus on data going out. So how have you protected your customer information being read by a vendor and misusing? So all that is there. That's one way you can pitch, and you can do something called which was an erstwhile SAS 70 audit, and now it be an SSAE 16. India's terminology, there isn't a terminology for it, but it's called a vendor audit. That's what it is, a third-party vendor audit. So you can look at an opportunity wherein data goes out and probably look at this and do this. Classic clients would be your mutual funds, where applications are going across and it's getting read by a vendor and it's coming in. Banks again, you can look at these opportunities in banks. So this is the sort of setting that I wanted to give to this whole presentation before we get into what GRC is. So how many of you have really heard about GRC here? It's a very monetizable practice for chartered accountants in I would say in our country as well, as much as it is globally. So GRC would mean a lot of things across. Say for example, you look at SAP as an ERP platform. GRC would mean their access control module. But GRC as an overall governing concept is something very different. So it talks about three specific things: governance, risk and compliance, right? There are three things that are relevant to any organization. So they say that the most steady state in any organization is when governance, risk and compliance talk to each other, and the organization is set up so beautifully to ensure that you achieve the best out of what you want to achieve in a controlled manner with minimum risks and and compliant to the laws of the country, right? And abroad as well. So I'm going to not read too much of text here, but what I would say is GRC doesn't burden the business, it supports and improves it. So today, a lot of people will say, hey look, GRC is a big concept, we need money for all this. The reason why we say this is because how many of you in all of your clients have seen a data governance officer in the organization? Chief Information Officer, CIO, CRO, Chief Risk Officer, yeah? You've heard of, yeah? So CRO, CIO, DGO, data governance officers are all, relatively coming in. CROs at least, are there. CIOs and DGOs are still pretty new to this place. And this is where, you have a lot of opportunities in terms of looking at clients who would be able to, or would rather want to use their data and monetize the data for themselves. So they want to understand data in dashboards. Nobody has a system or MIS today which tells us how their spends are going, right? Who's the, like for example, let me take travel expenses, right? Who is their major, which department is the major travel expense department is something that they would be interested in, right? Are there split transactions in their travel? Say for example, if the limit for a particular type of travel is $50, has somebody created two invoices for 25 each, right? Those are basic things that anybody is interested in, which are very easily detectable through understanding data and taking out in a manner using a tool. So these can be done. One classic tool that we use is ACL. You've heard of ACL? R is a data mining tool. That's an open source tool that you can look at. Python is another one. These are things that you can look at. Very cheap and easily available across. So when your organization is not, how do you know that an organization is GRC enabled or not? You will have all these problems within the organization. As in, your governance is not aligned, decision making is not, it's dependent on one person because of promoter, ownership or whatever it is. Then you don't have standard policies and procedures. You don't have departments talking to each other. You don't have an independent audit function. There is no legal compliance officer in the organization. Classic example, you can look at probably real estate companies, right? Your project management companies, and if they don't have a compliance officer, it's a big tell about the ethos of the company. So today, if say for example you're running about 200-300 projects, or forget that, even 10 projects, I would need a compliance officer to read my agreements that I enter into, right? So that is a big tell-off. So today, enabling GRC is all of this. It's a concept that we all know, but it's all bundled together into one thing. So what does a GRC enabled organization look at? So there is ethics, there is integrity. This is again coming from your corporate governance principles. And then there is an integrated reporting framework and analytics, right? This has become the most important concept in all of this, because you may have systems and processes in place, but if you don't have information to feed them, it's of less use. So any of you do work with nationalized banks? Not private sector banks, nationalized banks? Yeah. So if you look at nationalized banks, one of the things that is of really difficult to get is data. So today, if you want to know how many new businesses, how many loans have given for new businesses, is something that you would want to know, right? If an organization is less than 1 year old and you've given a loan to him, you need to know. Similarly, how do I give a loan to an entity, right, which is less than 2 years old? Can someone tell me what could be the data that could help this organization in this front? Say for example, I'm a company which is 2 years old, right? These are ideally the startups that we are talking about, right? So what could be a good basis for me to assess in terms of the data that is available, that will help me directionally create a product for the bank? A product for the bank, as in, you can call it startup loan or whatever it is. What is the data that is relevant for this? Sorry? CIBIL score, yes, but it's only 2 years old. You're not going to get a great CIBIL score. The ability of the promoters, yes, that's one thing. But you can't write a product around the ability of the promoter, right? You need to have some measured. So you should say at some point of time, okay, up to 20 lakhs loan is available, up to 30 lakhs loan is available.
Based on projections.
Sorry?
Based on projections.
Okay, based on projections. But what would be the gating conditions that you would put in there?
Financial statements.
Financial statements, yes.
Credit
How would you?
analysis.
Excellent. How would you take that data?
They will have it.
Sorry?
They have to get audited for any loans, right?
You don't have to ask me. If I'm coming to you to loan, how would you get that data without asking me? Yeah. GST number. I can get their sales from their GST number, right? You can connect your organization's, infrastructure with using an API to your GST and put in the GST number and get the GST sales that is there. So this is what most of your organizations today are doing. Take your ICICI and the other private banks. They would say they have a new category of loan which says that, startup loan or whatever it is, less than 2 years, they give you 25% of your previous year's reported GST sales is the limit that they have fixed. Why is it that they are doing this? Is because, I don't have to interact with you for a lot of time. if you fall within this bracket, the data is already available to me. I will just give you a call and, hey, look, you are eligible for this. You take this loan. Is what they are doing, right? So that is the power of data today. So.
But one thing, in this particular thing, actually what they do is, in income tax, you have to do it only if the borrower authenticates.
Correct.
Similarly, even in GST, is this authentication required from borrower?
It is required. See, today, like for example, you have your data privacy bill, data protection bill that's come in. One of the critical factors of your data protection bill is that you should get the concurrence of your customer. But that concurrence, how they are getting, is a very dicey thing, in the sense that you will have a huge application number in which somewhere around the corner it will say that your data will be shared subject to all confidentiality guidelines, right? So that is already done. So your question, I'll come to the final aspect of your question is what happens if there's a data breach, right? If somebody suddenly gets a call and say, hey, look, you're eligible for this loan, you will be scared. You will say, hey, how did you get this information? So what happens as part of a mitigating mechanism is, if there is a breach, right, which you are not, there's a problem for you, there is a 72-hour time frame within which the breach has to be reported by the bank to you. The second part of it is, if you have a problem, you can call up the bank and ask them where you have shared this data. You have that power today. So that is coming up after the Lok Sabha elections. They've timed it nicely. So that's coming up. But your question is valid in terms of what is the concurrence that they get from, but this is how it is. It's not.
But, see, I'm also a bank.
Is it okay? Lovely.
Okay. So the problem on it is, they do, they send the OTP number to the borrower.
Correct.
Okay. So obviously the borrower has to share the OTP number.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
100%.
so that's how it is.
Correct. So there are two types of, again, this is again with my experience with another private bank that I worked with. There are two types of loans that they give. One is a face-to-face loan, right, wherein they go, they see the customer, they ask the customer to kind of give the information. The other one is an assisted, loan that comes through. So you will have a credit officer who sits in and puts in this information, which you have to ask the customer for all these. Say for example, if I'm a customer and I'm putting the information directly in, it's with me. So the product is defined in such a way, in the sense that if I put in the number within and I get the OTP and I have to validate it. So it's not really within, without my permission in a lot of sense. But what you say, the end, if that was your end objective of asking this question, if there is a breach or if somebody gets a call, but the answer is still in the process. We'll see a little bit of that a bit later. I've kind of documented that as well. So again, the drivers for GRC, this is again largely text, but what I would be interested in is stakeholder demand for high performance. Today, the other things are fairly obvious. One thing that all stakeholders are interested in is information in terms of how it comes through to them. What are the metrics and the dashboards that are available within the organization? There seems to be a lot of means and the mechanisms, the KPIs that get defined. So one example of a very relevant information for a stakeholder, let's assume that he wants to put in some more money. What would he be interested in when he looks at an organization? Sorry? If say for example, if a stakeholder wants to put in money, what is the kind of information that what would he be interested in within this context of high performance and information? What would he really be interested in? One metric that that an investor that I know is he asks for a particular information. It could be anything. It could be a purchases. It could be a sales, and they time the time frame within which they get that information. So there is something called 1 minute management. If whatever they ask is coming through to them within 1 minute or 10 minutes, so to speak, then it's a good indicator of information being readily available within the organization, right? Whether it's good or bad is secondary, but he's able to get that information. So that gives them a sense of perspective in terms of how quickly that information will be made available to them. Classic example would be how many assessments are pending against a particular organization. I really don't know, or rather I do have a lot of people with whom we deal with who don't have a ready list of pending cases against them. You can get it, but that's the sort of information that probably an investor would be interested in that goes into the carpet as well. So these are largely text. I don't want to dwell into it, but there are certain drivers, within the ambit of GRC in terms of what is expected. So what do you achieve in terms of GRC being done right? I will reduce cost, definitely, reduce duplication of activities, impact on operations, achieve greater information quality, achieve greater ability to gather information and use it effectively and efficiently, things like that. So you might look at it and say, look, all this looks very heaven-like, and we really don't know. But again, it goes back to the question of how you can effectively measure this and show this, right? That would be one of the case studies that we'll be looking at in terms of how to measure a particular, performance within a particular process. But these are largely the benefits, and there are, if you ask me, where do you begin with? What are the things that you need to look at? The first thing that you see here is unified vocabulary across disciplines. Why would this be relevant? If somebody says SOP within an organization, everybody has to understand it within the same context. If somebody says BU could mean a lot of things, right, to a lot of people. BU could be business unit, BU could be something else as well. So there has to be a certain commonality within the organization in terms of the terminologies that you use. Again, DB could be disbursement, DB could be anything, right? Database, it could be database, yeah. So for a banking company that I know, DB means disbursement. So there has to be a commonality of terminologies which you can understand. So what this would help in is to put out a certain SOP or a work instruction pretty easily, right? Define common components and elements, define common information requirements, standardize practices, identify communication for everyone involved. So this is something that you can Google. There is something called FSFP. There's an FSFP framework that is there, which tells you how to govern data, right? Under the FSFP framework, you have a set of activities that you need to perform to ensure that there is data governance within the organization. So that would enable a lot of work as well. So what the FSFP framework also tells you is how do you communicate, right? I'll give you an example. We also seem to have a banker in the mix. So now you have this chartered accountant, the notification has come through, wherein you need to have that digital signature for every chartered accountant to sign, right? So it is a significant problem for the banks. Why would that be? Because you have stock audit reports, you have SODs, TODs that are there, wherein your prime security is today stock and debtors, for which certificates need to come through, right, from chartered accountants. So the first things that the bank needs to do is to communicate to all their customers, saying that, look, we need the information to come in the way it has to come in, with digitally signed information. Why it could be a problem for a bank? And what would be the probably the interest in which this has been done?
The bank need to check again.
Sorry?
The bank need to check again.
Check
Check again.
the date.
The bank need to check again the data. Is there a
Yeah, but what?
Timing.
Sorry?
The timing of the report. The data.
Yeah. See, so one thing that, so what generally, again, this is no slight on any of the banks, but one thing that generally happens that we have observed in concurrent audits as well is the timing of the stock and debtors report that you receive. So if it's your prime security, what happens is invariably they bring it during the audit time. You put a set of observations that this is not there, they bring it and show it. So one of the reasons why this has been digitally enabled is to ensure that there are no delays in it. And the reason why this has been put out is because there is a lot of reliance on this information, because it's your prime security at the end of the day, right? It has to come in within your time frame. So what happened in a lot of private banks is they had discussions across their credit monitoring group. The credit monitoring group saw to this because it's a dicey situation, right? Yes, you need to ensure that all things are perfect, but at the same time you can't affect your client servicing at the end of the day, because business is business at the end of the day, right? So a lot of them, what they are planning to do, or rather, if they have not done it already, what they are planning to do is to do it in a very controlled manner. Today, you cannot go and ambush the client and say, look, this is what it is. You have to. Somebody will say, go away. You can't do this and stuff like that. So they have to ensure that they massage the information that is sent out. This is one example. Another example would be say your privacy bill, data protection bill comes through tomorrow, right? Suddenly, if you decide to send a mass communication mailer to all your customers saying, look, you have to, today you have concurrence to all the information that you have, we will not send any information, and it could be sent or could not be sent without your consent and things like that. The first thing that you will ask will be 10 buggers standing outside and saying that, tell me where you have shared my information. They can't do that. Again, there is a need for massaging that information and penetrating it in a phased manner. So that is where your data governance comes in. So you should know as an organization how to and when to communicate that data, right? That's very relevant. So the FSFP framework, if you look at it, there are various components to it. There is technology, there is governance, there is communication, how you have to communicate, what is the phase in which you need to communicate. Phase 1, what's the timeline? Phase 2, what's the timeline? So you need to have that kind of a plan even for a simple activity like this. So are your clients doing that in terms of communicating, especially your B2C, if your client is B2C, how are they dealing with it? These are things that you need to look at, right?
It's
FSFP. If you're not able to see it, let me know. I mean, I can send it through an email as well. So again, here GRC is not one or more technologies. GRC is an approach. It's a way of life. It's just a code to kind of emphasize the topic that we've discussed so far. So with this, I want to get into the specifics of it, just to understand. Is there a break here or something like that? Nothing like that, right? Okay. Yeah. All right. There are 3 parts to this, like I said, governance, risk and compliance. So we're going to quickly do an overarching view of each of these topics and a couple of case studies as well. So let's look at governance first, right? What am I interested in as part of data governance? You have strategy, you have organization, policies, procedures, measurement, monitoring, technology and communication. These are pretty much what your frameworks would also talk about, right? But why am I bringing this in here is because each one is an opportunity for chartered accountants, right? You get strategy. Today, you have consulting groups that are sitting in within entities defining how data has to be strategized. Using data, historical data within organizations to build products. So again, if I have to give you a financial services example, banking products are getting built based on historical data that you have, right? Today, coming back to the topic of a startup loan, they have gating conditions, wherein if it's above 25% or 50% of your previous year's sales, you're not going to get that loan. It's gated at that point of time, right? That's an example. Again, at a strategy level, you have a lot of healthcare companies, for example, generating products, the derma companies. So how do they collect information? They collect information through surveys. These informations are collected through surveys are actually documented, analyzed. They are tested for regression, time series, and things like that. And certain parameters and characteristics are brought out of it to build products. One example is if you see on Facebook again, life goals, philosophies, related pages, ads that comes through, pages that you need to subscribe to. If you go and check that, whatever I said, you will see people over 25 years married is the criteria that they look at for these ads to come in. They generally assume that there is a problem. I don't know why, but so again, strategy is something that we can definitely monetize. Policies and procedures across organizations is a big area for monetizing. I'm sorry, how many of you are from the industry and how many are from practice here? Industry or practice? Industry or? Okay, great. So I think a lot of people are in the industry as well, but what's interesting to note would be the amount of detailing that has been put out in terms of your operating procedure documents, your policies, work instructions, process flows. All these become relevant today because there is an inherent need to understand how data is moving within the organization, and a lot of people don't seem to have it, and that is an area of interest that where we do a lot of work in terms of documenting them for clients. Again, measurement and monitoring is where you need to have a lot of tools that used to come in. So from a data mining perspective, there is something called R, like I said. R is a data mining tool. You can use that. It's freely available. It's open source. You can use it It's pretty self-explanatory. It's not very difficult. You can do a lot of data analysis, and it gives you a lot of presentations and visuals as well that you can present your data better. From an audit perspective, ACL is a tool that we use wherein you can script and you can automate a lot of how do I put it, audit observations that you want to look at, like for example split purchase orders and things like that. Again, technology and communication. So from a data governance perspective, I'm interested in a lot of these things, in these 5 buckets. What's more important from an audit perspective is whether there are defined strategies within each of these buckets. Are someone looking at this, not in terms of a person, rather at least 2 or 3 things coming into a person, and is there ownership for it? So these are things that we are largely interested in. And how many of you are aware of span of control? Span of control is how much can a particular human being control in terms of what they do. So it is at 1 activity, 2 activities, 3 activities. So the maximum, that's defined, Booz Allen is 8. 1 person can control 8 things. That's the maximum that you can do. So if you find in any of your reporting structures that any management personnel holds beyond 8 portfolios, or rather 8 is the maximum, you say beyond 5 portfolios, there is an inherent risk there. You can actually go and tell them, look, this is a problem, right? These are where, areas where I can actually add value to the organization. Tell them that person is doing too much, right? So let me get into, data in the context of risk, wherein I would want to spend a little bit of time. I want all of you to just look at this and see if it makes sense, these risks that we have. The first one being, purchase order has not been approved as per DOA. It's a problem, right? 1 person can have access to create a vendor invoice all on his own. A user can potentially conduct fraudulent payment activity by creating fictitious vendor invoice and make direct disbursements to it. Problem, right? Undue liability getting created. Same person raising purchase orders as well as clearing a GRN. Common cost accounting. Things like this, right? These risks make sense, right? So let us take one example out of it. Let's see how you would detect it using data. Okay, which one shall we take? Shall we take point number 3? User can potentially conduct fraudulent payment activity by creating fictitious vendor invoice and making payment to it. So if that is the end objective, so can someone quickly tell me what are all the data that you would need to see this?
Access control.
Access control, yes. Let's be specific. What are you looking at?
The person who's got access to the vendor database also
Right.
has access to retail.
That's again a statement. I want specific. What list it out for me. What are you looking at? What will you take? What will you marry? What will you get out of it? Can someone tell me that in that detail?
How big it goes, how many signatories, or
Right.
independent accident.
Right.
So who authorizes, who checks it, or how many people authorize?
Absolutely. So what you're saying is the delegation of authority metrics. So that's the first information I would need. Yes. What else I would need? Let's be very specific about it.
I think a confirmation from the employee. Seek a confirmation.
Confirmation. Yeah. Let's assume that we have it. Okay. What else you would need?
Process of master creation itself.
Vendor master.
You mean
Vendor master.
vendor master? Yes. Perfect. What else? What's the first thing I would need?
Access.
Yes, of course. List of purchase orders, right? So I need a representative sample. So I would need a list of purchase orders. And what information am I seeking in that list of purchase orders? What do I need to see in that? I need to see the user who has created it, right? So in a lot of places what happens is you get a list of purchase orders, but it's just 3 columns, right? You have serial number, purchase order number, vendor name, that's all, amount, 4 columns. It's not going to help you, right? So today, before you start an audit, there is a requirement for you to clearly define what you want. So if I take this example, this is all I would need. I would need a delegation of authority metrics for me to tell me how it is governed, right? Then I would need my vendor master in that vendor master, I would need personal information of that vendor. In the sense, I would need phone numbers, I would need email IDs, I would need address, I would need the entire vendor master table with me, right? That's number 2. Number 3 is I would need your employee master as well, right? That would also help me to do some comparisons with your vendor master to see if your vendor is an employee or things like that. That would be an indication for me to go ahead and see all the purchase orders within that vendor and see if it's happened. 4th thing would be the list of purchase orders with the user who has created it, with the user who has approved it, right, according to the release. So if I have all this information, only then I'll be able to do this objective, right? So today what unfortunately happens in a lot of places is we have a set of objectives, but when we send in the information request, we are not very specific, right? Either, there are 2 things that we would need. One is either we should possess the ability to take that information out, which means that we need that ERP knowledge. It could be, Oracle, it could be SAP, it could be Ramco, it could be anything. So if you don't possess the knowledge, you have to have the ability to articulate what data you would need to do this specific checkpoint. So when you give in your information request, please be specific when you ask for information. You can go down to the level of saying, I need the list of purchase orders with so and so fields, right? You can do that. So that's an example. So for each of your risks, you can actually drill down the data request. So what happens is, when you govern your data like this, the time it takes for you to complete the audit is much lesser, right? You can actually split your activities into 2 parts. You can do analytical reviews, you can do transaction reviews. The reason I'm again coming back to the discussion that we had, say for example, you suddenly see an employee's phone number and a vendor's phone number matching. Then what would you do? You would want to go and pick up that sample and do it, right? So now I know which purchase orders I need to pick for my vouching. So that goes back. So again, the focus is on picking the data correctly. Once you articulate really well on that data, your ability to perform the audit better is scaling up, right? Yeah, so for example, ACL has a connector. So today, as far as I know, ACL connects with SAP and it connects with even your Tally database. You forget ACL for that matter, you have Excel through which you can collect it directly to your Tally database. Right. Yeah, but absolutely. So with ACL you can connect to your databases directly with it. So what you can also do is when you write the scripts in ACL for the matter, your scripts can be defined in such a way that you will request the data accordingly. So when you connect it to your respective ERP, it will go and pick up from the tables directly. So you don't have to really invest a lot of effort in that, but the focus should be on the coding of the scripts. Absolutely. So you need to know what you want. So once you do that, but what it helps you significantly, but again, this is again coming from my personal experience of having done a particular audit through Excel and SE16 tables in SAP and all that manually. It takes a lot of time for me to extract that data and bring it into the content in the shape and form I want, right? But ACL helps you to achieve that time, the time efficiency that really helps.
For a chartered accountant, we again have to invest ourselves in our programming and all that. That's the problem which we face currently.
Yeah, I mean, it's an opportunity as well, right? So, but again, it's something that a friend of mine asked me this question. Let's say the government suddenly decides, look, chartered accountants will not be the only ones who are signing balance sheets. Let's make it inclusive. Let the ICWA Institute and the ACS, fraternity members as well sign it. Suddenly, your opportunity, the demand and supply is kind of, you have more supply, right, by 3 times, where the demand is going to be the same. So what's going to happen? So today we are what we are is because of there is a government direction as well. So if that's going to happen, what is the scope for a chartered accountant is something that we all need to think about. So I think the majority of the work and the ability to monetize as well is much larger in consulting is what I feel. But again, that's my opinion. So most of it, what we spoke about, ERP as a data enabler, there is a critical need for us to understand the ERP language. And again, it's not very difficult in the sense that there are only 2 or 3 ERPs that rule the market. You have SAP, Oracle, Hyperion, and QuickBooks and Tally, and in terms of accounting packages. So that's about that. You can probably about 5 or 6 of them as well. Each business landscape is different, so that there is a need to understand business blueprint. What is business blueprint? So today, when a particular ERP has been implemented, right, there has to be, that implementation obviously happens basis interactions with user, right? There are a specific set of requirements which the organization would have shared with the implementation partner. So you have to get that document to have a look at what they have actually asked for. So ask for a business blueprint document, and if somebody comes and tells you there is no business blueprint document, you can straight away tell them, look, I'm not too confident about this ERP, because unfortunately or fortunately, there are a lot of implementations that are called vanilla implementations, wherein they say that, look, your business practices are very standard, we'll come and do a 10-day implementation and give it to you. Which then the ability of doing a user acceptance test, say for example, you take the ERP back, what would you test? Right? You need to know whether when I create a purchase order, it's been defined according to my delegation authority metrics, right? So there is an inherent need to do a UAT. So you can actually, go and ask them if there is a business blueprint document and whether you have done a UAT for it, and you compare both and see whether they have actually kind of signed off on what they initially agreed upon. In about, you have about 30-40% which won't match, which would have changed, but they would not have documented, they would not have done the change management for it. So those are all the places where you can value add. Again, lack of standard reports, too many customizations. Again, lack of standard reports is something that's it's a common challenge across a lot of platforms today. But what we need to ensure is you should know the way to access tables and get that information out. There are ways. That is a skill that's invaluable, if you ask me, in this time and age. So if you don't have standard reports, you should know where to go in terms of tables and data and take it out. Standard operating procedures does not cover IT platform. So let me ask, so all of you would have looked at some standard operating procedure document, right? Let's say for example, procurement, right? You're looking at purchase order creation, or let's say purchase order approval, for example. If you look at the standard operating procedure document, have you noticed anywhere where that standard operating procedure is talking in relevance to the ERP in question? As in, go to ME21, open this, approve, do the approval, click this, approve it, and at that level. You generally don't see that, right? So what happens is a lot of standard operating procedure documents talks process. So and so, the purchase officer will open, will approve create this thing, and the reporting officer will approve it. That's it. Nobody talks specifics of the platform that is there. There is a need for it. Say for example, you teach someone this for 3 years and the person leaves the organization. Who's going to teach him again?
You have
Right?
work instructions, right?
Sorry? Work instructions, exactly. So whether it's your operating procedure document or your work instruction document, you need to have these things documented, because incidentally I met an IT head of a bank yesterday, and he said the problem with banks is their transfer policy. So they put someone in the IT department for 3 years, teach them the whole damn thing, and transfer them to general banking. So he said, I have to be looked at as an efficiency generator, not as someone who's a training master. So if you see some organization where rotation of duties is causing a challenge in a lot of ways, that is, you use critical skills and resources and they don't plan for it, then those are things that you should point out. So coming back again, your operating procedure document have to be, whether you call it SOP or work instruction, there has to be documented, ways in which you can actually understand and decode or deconstruct that ERP. So these are all concepts within SAP where data moves. So I think I'm going to move ahead with this because it's going to be a bit too relevant. Let's look at probably data access in one ERP for that matter. So we all spoke about access, right? So what am I interested in when I look at, let's say SAP, or rather let me kind of discuss with you what we can do with SAP, right? There are 4 things you can do with SAP as an ERP. You can do the access risk analysis. What is access risk analysis? Access risk analysis is you have created a particular role, right, to do certain set of things, whether who has access to that role, right? That's something that you need to see. So if I've given that access to a role to two individuals who are conflicts, right, then I have a problem. As in, if I am Aditya and I have been assigned the purchase order creation role and I have been assigned the purchase order approval role, there's a problem, right? Today, you don't have to get into the transactions to see that. You can see it at a ERP level, right? So it saves a lot of time. You come up with a significant audit observation or finding, and management will look up and say, look, there is a good value add, right? That's one. The second one is another very common problem in our case as well. This is the emergency access. So somebody is on leave, so emergency access is assigned to them. So they go and do the transaction within the time frame. So what happened was when we looked at a certain set of purchase orders for a particular organization, about 30 to 40% were approved by using an emergency access ID, right? So why would that be? I mean, I don't think an individual will be absent for about 40%. So what we did was we looked at the emergency access that was taken and compared it with the timesheet of that person to see if that person has actually come in during that time, right? If he's not come in and then I have an emergency access, then I'm still fine with it, right? Because he's taken off, he's not been there in the building. But if there is a time scale wherein he has come in and still an emergency access is being used, then we have a problem with it, because it's like a group ID. Anybody can kind of take access to it and do it. But these are the things that you will get out of a proper data recce. Access request management. So if you're an audit, you can try this out. Just go and ask for the last 6 months or 12 months during the time frame in which the users have been created, right? Ask them to give you the access request forms, right? The problems that we generally find is when you have this access request form, they would have asked for something, right? They would have created something else, because this access request form looks like this. You have shells within the access request form. A shell, when I say, could be a purchase module shell, and a finance FI module shell, a costing module shell. So you have to basically tick shells. Within that shell, you will have various things that you can do. So I'm a finance guy, right? And if you do a check of the access request form and I have an inventory access, right? You should be worried. You have to see what actually goes in has actually been requested and approved. So this is a significant challenge today, right? So what you can do is you can take the list of users that have got created in the last 12 months, take a sample of access request forms for that and see how they've got created. And what access they've asked for is actually what has got translated into the system. That will give you a fair representation of how the IT governance is within the organization. The last one is, of course, the business role management, but the most important one. The reason why I say that is because when you design a business role, you're again going back to governance, right? So you should not have over subsetting functions within two business roles, and if it's there, the access has to be maker checker. So a lot of things in this is to go and look at the access that has got granted and how your roles have got defined within the organization. Again, here your span of control can be checked using this. Say for example, you take a list of users and look at the kind of shells that they have access to. That will give you an indication of the departments where they have a say, right? If it's more than 5, you can ask them and find out why the span of control looks kind of dicey. Right. Yes, it does. So what happens is, can you also give me a little bit of context on the stolen password? Sorry, if you can just pass on the mic.
Disbursement
Correct.
Okay, so obviously that is not there in the system when it has been designed.
Right.
The only problem is that would be where the chances is where the payment user, okay,
Yeah.
his password could be stolen,
Right.
and that would where the authorization could have happened.
Correct.
Okay, and of course authorization again goes through 3 levels.
Yeah.
But what we are trying to say is that password store is a major issue which is coming across.
Correct.
We face all this. So the logs also we try to see this logs from where which system it is logged in and which
Yeah.
password it is logged.
Right. So what happens is.
We check that actually.
So what happens is, if it's, let me give a very relative example to an ERP, right? Doesn't matter. Say, let's assume it's SAP, right? You have an access that has been done of an individual. You want to know whether it was stolen, whether that individual has done it or not. The first gating that I would do is whether that person was in the building at that point of time or not. That's the first thing that I would want to know. The second one is your system logs that are there. Your system logs basically tell you which is the MAC ID of the system or the IP of the system that is used to access that particular user at that point in time. So you have a specific system log that's available wherein you can correlate it with the user and see whether that system actually belongs to the user. But even if it's a case where they have used the user system to do this, right? One thing would be to quickly tell you is look at the time within which it has been done and check the CCTV. If it's there in a conspicuous place and you're able to visibly catch it, you've got it. So there are ways you can do this. So what I would like to probably do is let's look at procurement quickly, and if we can have this a little bit interactive, because I don't want to be the sole person talking on this, become very theoretical otherwise. Let's look at procurement for the time being, and let's see how we'll do this audit. In the sense that let's not get into too much of specifics of what I will check and stuff like that, but let's try to design a data plan for procurement, right? If I have to do a design for procurement, how would I do it? How would I landscape this audit? What would be the first set of things that I would want to note down, that I want to collect from the client? Process flow activities, yes. List of vendors, again, very specific. You're going very specific. Let's landscape this. Let's not get into very specific details. What are the things that I would be really interested in to look at?
How many items are in procurement?
Yeah, that's again, you mean product lines. Let's not go into that detail at all.
Purchase order?
Yes, purchase, again, that's detail. So what I mean by landscape is what are the different aspects of the organization that you would want to touch. Process flow diagrams, yes, so that I would take it as policies and procedures. So what I would first need is the set of policies and procedures which the organization has, right? That's one. Number two would be control design. Operating effectiveness is something that I want to see. So say what would be the source of it if they have a risk control metrics, either the ICFR requirement or an internal audit framework that they have, that would give me a fair idea in terms of how their risks and controls are defined, right? What's control design and what is operating effectiveness? Can someone quickly tell me?
One is theory and the other is practice.
Not really.
Effectiveness would be the timeline between one process to
No,
another.
control design is something where I have put in place a system to gate a particular problem. Operating effectiveness is basically a problem with human beings. So I did 10 transactions. I did 7 transactions well. 3 transactions I have a problem. So basically, you take 10 samples and find out there's a problem in 3 samples. That's operating effectiveness. But you take 10 samples and figure out all 10 samples have escaped this problem because there is no design that has got defined. Then that's a control design issue. Classic example: your DOA does not talk about a release strategy. As in, DOA, delegation of authority matrix, does not talk about who has to approve a purchase order. That's a control design failure. Organization has not thought about it. So any purchase order you take, whoever has released it, it might be right or wrong. There is a problem because today nothing has been defined in terms of what needs to be done. Operating effectiveness. A purchase order has got defined levels of who has to sign. 10 have been signed, 3 have not been released by that person, someone else has released it. It's an operating effectiveness issue, right? there could be various reasons to it. That person was not available on that date, because of which there is no defined policy in terms of who has signed it, or it could be a case where it's genuinely escaped an issue wherein it could relate to another control design issue where it can still go out in spite of that person not approving it. Those are all relative issues, but largely to me 3 have not got approved. So that's a operating effectiveness issue. So the first thing that I would like to know is probably the organization policies and procedures that will give me a flavor of what they're doing. Then I would like to see if there is a delegation of authority metrics that will again give me a flavor. And then I would like to probably look at what control designs and operating effectiveness frameworks are there for the organization. So I'm going to quickly go into it. So first I need to understand the business process. So I would obviously be interested in the process flow components, the control design and operating effectiveness. And then I would probably classify the risks, operational risks, financial risks, compliance risk, and similarly I need to kind of bucket. This is again emanating from your risk control framework. It could be ICFR, it's financial, if they have an over-embarking risk register, that's even great. Then you have your specific ones, your organization structure, DOA, your business process mapping, SOPs, again different types of controls. But what we are talking about here is how do I understand this business, right? It would give me a fair indication of what? It would give me a status of the maturity of the organization. When I say maturity of the organization, there's something called your CMM, right? Capability Maturity Model, which is got defined. That's for IT, of course, but it's very relative to the maturity of an organization. So what it states is every organization today can be there in 5 stages of life. One is initial, one is repeat, the third one is defined, the fourth one is optimized, the fifth one is whatever. Forget about it. When I say initial, it means that the organization is in such a stage that it's very new. A lot of people are learning a lot of things within the organization, so nothing is kind of crystallized, so they are still figuring things out. The second one is repetitive. What it means is I'm doing something, right? Over a period of time I figured out that what I'm doing is sort of working for me, so I continue to do that. That's repetitive. The third one is defined, wherein I've been doing something for a long time, now I've put down everything in writing. I know that these are the things that I need to do for an organization. I've written it down. Then you have optimized. So I know something that I've done really well, I've defined it, now I can improve upon it, right? I'll optimize, try to achieve optimization efforts into it. So now, when you look at this landscape, what it will tell you is what is the maturity of the organization. Let's say if somebody is repetitive, in the sense that they've not defined everything, the first recommendation for you to probably, the management would be to tell them, boss, let's put it down, right? You need to, you've achieved a stage of repetitiveness, let's document everything, let's move ahead to something which is more defined. If it's initial, then a lot of the checks that you actually do have to be tailored, in the sense that you cannot go and tell them, look, are you having a management dashboard in terms of what purchase is done within this time frame and this time frame for the organization? No. It's very initial. You have to temper your audit accordingly. You have to be a little bit more practical. Understand that these guys are still learning to do this business, right? So this kind of a landscape, when you prepare this, broadly look at it this way. You can actually split it between governance, risk and compliance. Look at what documents are available. That will give you a fair ethos of the organization, and that will tell you what kind of data that you need to ask, right? If you are auditing an organization as a listed entity, then go hammer and tongs. Ask very specific data with respect to the area that we're looking at. So if I'm looking at procurement, right, and if I'm planning to ask for a data, right, this is how I would probably do it. So what I would initially do is I will break down the entire procurement ambit into different sub-processes, right? And all this is before I set foot within the entity for the audit, right? I need to break it down into various sub-processes. So what I have done here is I've split it into 2 parts, pre-award and post-award, right, for procurement. So now that I've shown you this, I'm going to again hide this. We'll have a quick look at it. So let's take the pre-award perspective, right? What is pre-award? Can someone tell me? Sorry? It is the let's say that we're looking at procurement as a function, procure to pay, as a function, right? And I'm defining a data plan for it, right? Let's assume for the time being I've split the entire procurement activity into two parts, pre-award and post-award, right? Let's say pre-award. What is it that I'm looking at in pre-award? Give me examples.
Quotations, listings.
Yes, so basically my sourcing process, right?
Requisites.
So basically what I'm looking at is what kind of vendors I have. Do I have a vendor empanelment process, right? Whatever I do during the sourcing, do I take 3 quotes? What is the value limit within which I take 3 quotes? So when I do that, I would be able to kind of get a framework in terms of what kind of purchase orders I should pick for samples. Let's assume that the DOA says that up to 1 lakh, right? I can go with single quote, right? So what you should probably do is look at all the purchases above 1 lakh, take out those purchase orders and see whether 3 quotes have got obtained for it, right? That is a pre-award check that you can do. Similarly, post-award, what can you look at? Post-award is basically monitoring, right? Monitoring of the purchase, whether GRN has happened, whether there are open POs and things like that. So let me just go back to this again, right? This is to basically temper my audit according to the nature of the organization. So what we're looking at is, first let's look at vendor empanelment, master data, limits of authority, need to request and requisitioning. This is what we largely look at as pre-award, right? These are the set of activities that happen before a vendor is on, a purchase order is raised on the vendor. So what kind of data would you ask for? Let's take pre-award for the time being, right? Under vendor empanelment, what kind of data would you be interested in?
Blacklisting vendors.
Right, but what would be, she's saying blacklisting of vendors, yes, I'll be interested in that. But let's not get into specific audit observations. Let's look at what kind of data that we would want. Sorry? Criteria for vendor empanelment. Basically, you would need the vendor empanelment operating procedure, right? Excellent. Then you would need your vendor empanelment documents, whether are there vendor empanelment documents available, whether they have a process for it. That's something that you would be interested in, right? Then what else? Let's go to the next one. I think 1 or 2 examples would do. Master data, what I would be interested in? What is the data that I would need? Vendor master? Employee master, yeah? The deviation metrics, yes, that's for limits of authority, yes. My DOA delegation of authority metrics is something that I would definitely put it down as an information request. Need to request. Why is this important? In some organizations, what happens is you will eventually find that a lot of inventory accumulation has happened. When you go back to the root cause of the problem, you will see that some user is actually requesting it, okay, without even looking at why he would need it, and the same approver is approving it. So when you looked at data, what we figured out is those kind of inventory was actually accumulated by one user requesting it and one user approving it, the same pattern. So they were basically accumulating inventory and making money of the vendor. So the need to request question becomes relevant because across the materials that you request for, you should have clearly defined strategy in terms of who can raise a purchase request. That becomes very relevant. So when I say DOA is for approval of a purchase order. But I also need to have a delegation of authority metrics for who can actually ask for a PR. Let's say an engineering department guy cannot request a material, a raw material, right? He can only request what an engineering function needs to request for, right? That has to be clearly defined. So that's something that you need to ask. So your requisitions could be a list of purchase requisitions that have got created in the last 12 months with all the specific fields that you would want. What would be the fields that you would be interested in? Give me 2 examples. PR number, PR date, yeah. The user who has created the purchase request, right? The material code of the inventory that has got requested, the material description, the quantity that has got requested. Why is that relevant?
To raise the purchase order, obviously.
Yes.
The
What?
economic quantity is being purchased.
Absolutely. See, if your ERP doesn't have a gating condition, your PR is for 10 units, your guy has gone and given that PR reference and bought 100 units for it. You should know that that data has to be compared with the purchase order listing to see if on a one-to-one basis, the control design, like we talked about, if I create a purchase request, the control design would be I should not be able to create beyond what has been requested. That's control design. If my control design fails, it means that I'll be able to create a purchase order beyond the PR quantity, in which case it will be transaction testing. When I do this transaction testing, I would rely on analytics, data analytics. So what I would do, I would take a list of purchase orders with these fields: PR number, quantity, material code, material description, user. I will compare it with the list of purchase orders. I will do a VLOOKUP and compare it with the list of purchase orders. So again, the list of purchase orders should have the PO number, PO date, material code, material number, material quantity that has got purchased, the user who has created it, the user who has approved it, and the PR number. I need to have a common field, right? So what happens? Genuine audit troubles. You ask for the list of PRs, you say list of POs, but you don't say that you need a list of PRs with the user, and you don't say the list of POs with the PR number. When you get that data, you won't really be able to do anything about it. So that is where the question of precision and accuracy comes into play. You should precisely know what you need to request for, and you should precisely get what you have asked for. So when you define it to the T, when you ask for this information, your audit process is quicker, right? So let's look at a couple of other examples as well. Quote to award. What would you be interested in quote to award? The gating conditions that we spoke about, right? Anything beyond 1 lakh needs 3 quotes. You would want to see how many are beyond 1 lakh. Another data that I would be really interested in is 2 purchase orders created for 90,000 and 90,000 on the same day by the same user, right? For the same material. So this is called a PO split. So this is something that you can easily pick up from your purchase order listing. Do a comparison between the date, the vendor, same date, same vendor, same material, and that should give you that information. So these are all the things that you can probably do with analytics. You can actually write codes for it, and you can run it through the database, and it will throw it out. You don't have to really manually do this. Purchase orders, again we spoke about. Contract management, right? Contract management is a very large term, in the sense that you may have a lot of conditions by which you have issued a specific contract. Your contract could be long form contracts with customers, it could be long form contract with vendors. When you issue long form contracts with vendors, one of the critical things is what is the kind of conditions that you have ensured. There are 2 things that you need to ensure. You need to ensure that all the vendors get the same terms, because there are some common terms and conditions that go through. Like classy example, jurisdiction clause. Right? If your purchase order that you issue does not have a jurisdiction clause, what happens is you can be called to court anywhere. So you are a company based out of Chennai, you may have to go to Jharkhand. If your vendor is based out of Jharkhand, he calls you in Jharkhand, you can't do anything about it. So if you ensure that as part of the jurisdiction clause you say all cases of litigation will happen in the courts of Chennai, then you're preventing a significant problem and also potentially saving costs for your organization, right? So similarly, what kind of information would I be interested in PO amendments? Can someone tell me? PO amendments, purchase order amendments. What kind of data that you would request for doing an audit of PO amendments? Amended PO quantity. Yeah. Date of amendment. Yes. Who has amended it? Yes. And most importantly, which it's not looked at, is whether when I do an amendment, does it go through a release function again? Yeah. So, not really. In a lot of our experiences, it isn't. There are 2 kinds of problems in that. One is when the person amending a particular purchase order, it doesn't go through the entire release again. It stops at a certain level and it just triggers the incremental release. In some cases, it does not go at all. So purchase order, again, this is again coming from your blueprint review. You need to look at your blueprint document and see whether purchase order amendments have been looked at, right? So on and so forth under each of these areas. But what would hold all this together is your enterprise-wide policy, your organization charge, delegation of authority metrics, your data mining, your risk assessments. So you need a set of things initially to basically govern your data plan. Once you govern your data plan and send out a very specific information request, a lot of things are, you save a lot of time on this. So this is again, without going too much into detail, what kind of profiling that I would do. So I would be interested in knowing the class of materials, POs by value, PO by approval limits. These are the kind of analysis that you can do, right? You can look at your top users who are buying within the organization. You can look at what is the mostly bought material and things like that, right? What would I would also be interested in is the MRP settings. When I say MRP settings, what I mean is minimum requirement plan, right? So in a lot of organizations, your ROL, ROIs are not very effectively defined. So say for a particular material, if my reorder level and reorder quantity is not set up properly, you have a problem where you can actually accumulate inventory, right? So that is again a master data that you need to ask for to see if what is the reorder level and reorder quantity that you would need within the organization, right? So similarly for the purchase function, you can look at a lot of various buckets of data. Now, can you tell me what is the source of this bucketing? Let's forget about the bucketing. You forget about PO by approval limits, transaction profiling. You forget POs by value. But what is my source in this? So what we saw during the landscaping is not specific data, right? We are looking at trying to understand the organization as a whole. Organization policies, procedures, so on and so forth, right? When you get into the specifics of it, at some point in time you need to drill down when you do the audit plan, right? So at that point of time, what is the singular most specific data for procurement? There are two types of data. There is master data, there is transaction data. When you're looking at transaction data, the singular most representative data that you need is the list of purchase orders. When you get the list of purchase orders, it should have all the columns in it, all the information that you would need, from PR to GRN to payment, everything. Basically your three-way match should all be available in one single spreadsheet, which is possible. If you take one representative population, all your analysis, like I'm showing here, your PO by value, whether it's PO by approval limits, transaction profiling, all that can be done easily. It will give you patterns. You can do time series analysis and all that, which is again enabled through tools, right? That would probably be a lot more value addition than doing the regressive sampling and checking documents. So, yeah, I think that's what I want to do. So let's take a break for about 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and I would probably have another half an hour of information, which is largely to do. Okay, let me just say it's to do with the relevant concepts in the sense that GDPR and data privacy bill, not too specific, but largely what you need to do from the profession's perspective. And we'll do one small case study for data science project. How would I probably look at it? I'm things like that. So let's look at two specific things that are of flavor recently. GDPR. How many of you are aware of GDPR? Yeah, general. GDPR is basically something that came up. Let's look at this table a bit later. GDPR is something that came up in the European Union first, and then the US. It's got adopted. GDPR is something that was proposed in, I think it came into effect in May 2018, and across the European Union it's now in full scale. And one of the recent news, one of the very large private banks has been fined $2 million for a non-compliance relating to GDPR, right? So with respect to GDPR, why are we discussing GDPR today? Can you tell me why? Give me one example of why it would be relevant. Yeah, that's true. Today, the concept of GDPR, if you look at the ambit that I have defined, right? You forget about the fines, 4% of turnover, all that is huge, humongous, okay? And a lot of organizations have suffered. But the primary purpose of bringing GDPR today is because of what happened in 2004 and 2017, that the first slide that I showed you. there is too much of sensitive personally identifiable information, SPDI, which a lot of organizations are handling. And the source of that is coming from social platforms as well, right? So now there is an over-embarking need for all the organizations to look at GDPR pretty seriously for violations in terms of privacy. So one of the first things the GDPR said is, listen, the user is going to have the control over the data that he owns. So you have to take the permission of that specific data owner before you can do whatever with this data. That's number one. Number two, if you take the data, right, with the permission, and if there is a breach in terms of data security, you're supposed to report it within 72 hours. That's the second thing. The third thing is, if a particular data owner comes back to you and says, listen, tell me where my data is going, you have an owner's responsibility to tell him what you're doing with that data. Three things, or of primary importance. The other things, yes, mandatory data protection officers, and another interesting is the right to be forgotten. If the data user, the owner comes and tells you that, look, you have to erase my data, you need to erase it. So these are all certain very critical, calls that have got taken. And one of the things is you saw the recent Facebook and Sundar Pichai also of Google, going in before the commission, right, talking about data privacy issues. This is precisely that. They are all worried about decentralization of data and control, significant control over data for organizations. So what's happened here is there is the use of data has been recognized, and there is an apparent need to have a data governance officer, and all the entities across in the US, and very recently they implemented GDPR in California as well. It's got significant, people coming in and saying, listen, don't do this, but they've still gone ahead and done it. European Union were the first people to do this, and they've done it well as well. So why is it of interest for you and me sitting in India? Give me an example. Sorry?
Other data.
Yes, but today GDPR is what it is. It's European Union, it's US. Why are you interested in this?
Because of transaction in these countries.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, you could have a client who is having a branch office in any of these directions, and you could also have a customer who is an NRI who is residing in the European Union, right, and who is also a EU citizen, right, or is he's in the US, and you may be holding data that is relevant to them, which is sensitive, personally identifiable. And SPDA is something that's very clearly defined under GDPR. They have clearly defined what is it. It could be medical information, it could be relating to your sex, it could be relating to your personal information like your date of birth, your blood group. All these things are defined under SPDA, right? Now, one of the things that we have said here is increased territorial scope. So what they are saying is, if you are a European citizen and you come to India and you give your data to someone, and that data gets misused, you are coming under a GDPR violation. It's very clear. It's an established thing. So now, which industry would be very interested in this? Just give me two specific examples.
Banking.
Banking, yeah? Because you may have products which could be, focusing on foreign exchange. You could have customers who are all NRIs. You have an inherent risk here, right? And let's take this very specific example and just work on the data governance angle that we're talking about. We have talked about communication as one of the important aspects of data, right? Data governance. The need to massage the information that you need to send out. So now GDPR has come in. The classic example of a bank wherein there is a risk that's going to go out. How would you communicate this to your customers who are NRI? Will you send a mass mailer saying, listen, your GDPR compliant now, we cannot disclose this. Will you do that? If I'm a customer sitting in France, for example, saying, and look at this mass mail that's come through, hey, listen, I'm going to take a step back. I don't know what this mail is from the organization. I'm slightly worried. I'm going to take this deposit out of the bank. I could do that. No, it could have a little bit fear. It's human psychosis, right? At the end of the day, you can't do that. So you need to have a method to do this. So a lot of organizations are today recognizing the fact that you need a data governance officer, especially with this coming in, right? What in the specific example they would do probably is, first get a feel of how many customers are there like that, then soft message them, right? In the sense that call them and tell, listen, I'm the relationship officer, so and so, And then, you know, at the end of the day, you will say, look, this is also there, we're taking care. So you have to message that information that goes out. So you should have a clear-cut communication plan in terms of how you send out this message. You cannot be a bank and send out a mass mailer regarding this. You can't do that, absolutely not. You lose goodwill, you might lose customers. Your MD will come up and say, listen, why did you do this? You cannot lose deposits. It's directly related to my capital adequacy. You can't do that, right? That's one example. So now, what's another industry? Can someone tell me another example of an industry?
Information technology?
Information technology, yes, absolutely. Especially wherein you have these captive units that are there across the country, wherein you have a US owned subsidiary functioning as a captive unit. You have Europeans coming in, all their information is collected, you're getting paid in India, for example. Those are people, you know, you have to be really careful about, right? That's another one. One more?
Tourism.
Sorry?
Tourism.
Absolutely, that's what I was looking for. Hospitality sector, right? Your hospital, all your hotels, you might have guests, right? European guests that are coming in. Today, there is a process already wherein if you have another foreign national that's coming into hotels, you're supposed to make, there's something called C form. The C form is communicated to the nearest police department in that jurisdiction of that hotel, saying that so-and-so national passport and all that is sent across. It's a government regulation of Government of India, right? So there is an inherent need for the hospitality industry to ensure that this information is controlled, because their focus is not data security. Their focus is, you know, customer satisfaction, in the sense that they are more in tune to seeing how well the customer is taken care of. So that mindset has to change. They cannot have weak systems anymore. They have to ensure that the information that they collect, the passport number, date of birth, all that of the European citizen is protected. So tomorrow it does not come back to bite them. And this is almost relevant. The relevance is there in this country is because your major hotel chains that are there are big players, are listed companies today, right? So there is a need to appreciate this law. So what is it that's relevant for this country then? So there is the data protection, the data privacy bill that's come in. The retired Supreme Court Judge Mr. Krishna, so he presided over it, and these were the members who were there who sat through and brought about this draft data protection bill 2018 that's come up, right? That gives you a set of things. Is it visible? Should I make it a bit bigger? So if you look at it, there is a lot of similarities that you would see to the GDPR that we saw, right? So basically what they've done is they have taken in everything that GDPR said, right? And they've made it a bill now. So if you look at the common things that you see the law will have a jurisdiction over personal data. So they have defined what personal data is. It will not be retrospective, because obviously the country has to get used to it, right? Then the law will be will cover processing of personal data by both public and private entities. They have brought in all entities within this gambit, right? You have SPDI will include passwords. They define clearly what SPDI is, right? You will have medical information, things like that. One of the critical industries that will be affected by is all your healthcare industries, right? Who take in a lot of information, applications, which are healthcare driven, huge implications for that. It includes even political beliefs, right? So they've extended it to such an extent. So say today, tomorrow, somebody targets you based on your political belief in social media. You have an inherent, law which protects you to ask that information. Now the DPA is being set up. The DPA is the authority that is going to control this. The new regulator will have a chairperson and 6 full-time members. So these are all the frees and formats of it. For consent for the individuals has to be valid. It should be free. So Madam, you made a good point in terms of how they take a consent today. You see, probably the consent is where the most dicey part lies. Today, somewhere conspicuous, it's written. It should not be conspicuous. That's what it says. It also says that it has to be informed, specific, clear, and capable of being withdrawn. So all that is written. So you cannot have it in a very conspicuous way. Consent will have to be explicit. Individuals have a right to access their data. Penalties may be imposed for violating the data protection law. Any person above 18, less than 18 is a child, and data collecting entities. These are the ones. This is the point. data collecting entities. You remember the OCR example that I gave? So if you have any entities within yourself who are vendors to you, wherein they act as data collecting sources either, or your OCR readers, you may want to check out. You have to kind of relook at it with compliance perspective. Refer to your compliance officer and ask him, look, how do we handle this with this coming out, right? Do we have specific gating clause with your third party? The committee has identified, this is the interesting part. The committee has identified 50 statutes and regulations with potentially overlap with the data protection framework. I would want to know which one of them are, so someone told me who heads a manufacturing industry in one of my clients. So he said he figured out, listen Aditya, I figured out that there are 3,500 laws which are applicable to us as an organization. He says, applicable, yes. How much of it I can govern, I don't know. That would be a handful of about 20 or 25. But if you read at the fine print, there are so much that is written today that you don't know. If suddenly somebody can come up and ask you, listen, what are you doing about this? Right? So that's a very interesting observation to make. There are 50 identified laws, which means you already have 50 laws which talk about this. There is an overlap that's happened. So I would probably put down one or two that I know, but I can't see 50. Which also tells us a tale here, right? Another interesting thing. See, the Aadhaar Act needs to be amended to bolster data protection, and the committee has suggested amendments to the Act. So I don't know if you guys know this movie that came out in Tamil about the misuse of Aadhaar card. Yeah, that's very relevant. So they are saying that this data protection bill will have a significant amendment to the Aadhaar Act, because the way the data was collected when this Aadhaar card was made, we don't know how secure it is. And how many of you use these cab service providers? I don't want to. Obviously, every one of us will be using. I don't want to name them. There are only two. You would know which one it is. You would have this KYC that was done for wallets very recently. If you use the wallet money feature of those aspects, you might have got a call very recently saying that your KYC needs to be updated. We are the designated individuals to come and collect the KYC. Please be careful when you do that. Why would so you're an app. So just think about it. You're an app. There is an ability to kind of collect the KYC online, as in you just have to complete the KYC within the platform itself, the application itself. So why would you send someone over to collect that information? And this has happened again. If you see who is collecting the information, it's not that entity. It's been outsourced to a third party who's coming in with a form, with a tab in hand, collects a picture of you, takes a picture of you, and then either your driving license or your PAN card. PAN card is compulsory. 2 proofs they take and they go. The first thing that you need to ask is, why are you coming? Why am I not getting an intimation? So the thing is, you don't get it by email. You get a call from a particular official saying that I am so-and-so representing so-and-so. So somebody will come over and collect it. So they have thought about all this when they did this. So they don't want anything in writing, right? They are sending over a third-party service provider. So all of this gives you an indication of where the thought process is going, right? So this is one of the very critical, relevance that we need to see in terms of how your data is being handled. So your Aadhaar Act, again, they collected a lot of information, so including your fingerprint, right? So we need to see how these things are protected. So current status of the privacy bill is it's tended to be looked at once the elections are done. So it would become probably they'll start to implement this in full scale once the election happens. So I would still go up now that I've spoken about these two specific ones that I want to talk about, because everything else would be largely, you guys would know in the forum. In terms of data from the relevant point of compliance, these are the acts that I'm largely interested in, because you have the Companies Act, you have Clause 49, you have Sarbanes-Oxley. So all of them pretty much talk about, because when we look at the fine print of it, they pretty much talk about 3 or 4 things in common. They want corporate governance, responsibility and accountability, they want an effective control framework, and they want transparency. Whatever wording you see in terms of all these encompassing acts, they talk about only these 4 things, right? So when you are management, so again going back to data from a compliance perspective, what are you interested in? Today, you as a board, if you're sitting on the board, you want to know whether I'm compliant with everything that So you need to have specific data to prove that, right? You cannot say, listen, I've done everything. You need to have relevant data to prove to management that, look, these are the acts, these are the clauses, these are the things. So again, it goes back to the data availability question mark, whether you have a dashboard for it. Responsibility and accountability, again, it goes back to the governance topic that we discussed. You need to have governed enterprises. Transparency, again, depends on the availability of information, how much you can share with your respective colleagues and individuals. And then the effective control environment is how, again, it goes back to governance. So invariably, if you look at all these compliance requirements that have been thrust into the industry and the realm, they are all talking about the same thing. They want it to be transparent, they want you to be compliant, they want accountability and responsibility in the future. So this is just to give you an overview, because I don't want to get into too much specifics on this, you get bored otherwise. But these are the two interesting things that you would probably look at, and there is a lot of opportunities as well. Today, if I'm not mistaken, in the US and the EU as well, you have captive units. There is a certification or audit requirement, which is either quarterly or half-yearly or something like that. I'm not too aware. There is certainly an audit that needs to be done to ensure that your company is GDPR compliant. And another interesting service that came about out of this thing was the amendment to the privacy policy of various companies on their websites. So you suddenly have this crop of individuals who are offering services to amend your privacy policy on the company's website to tailor make it to the GDPR compliance requirements. And during this time frame, the last 1 year, you would have, if you go back and check your Google emails or whatever emails that you have, you would see changes to privacy policy emails that all of you would have got, right? That is all coming back to this. They've aligned their privacy policy to the GDPR requirement, and very soon this will also become very relevant for us, and we will become a directly trust enterprise. For example, if you're in banking, you would have a mandate from RBI. I mean, it's already there, but in a lot of ways, but be a very trust and focused mandate to see where the information is going. And one of the things about banks in general is control and confidentiality over SPDI. I don't know. I really don't know. I have my views on that as well. It's something that the Indian banks have to really work on. And in the last 2 months, if you go and Google it, I can't name them. There have been 2 huge fines that have been levied on banks which are operating in India, but they are not from India, they are from abroad, because of a GDPR violation. So let us quickly look at the final part to this, a small case study, not a very big one, just a small case study on a data project. So when I say a data project, what we mean is we do this for a lot of our clients, wherein they are looking at a certain specific consulting objective, right? So we are looking at, say, you can say automation of a particular process, bring in process efficiencies. It's a very common terminology. You need to put a method to this whole thing. So say, for example, if somebody comes in and says, listen, I need to really understand how my accounts payable function is working, right? Whether it is deriving value. I seem to be paying a lot of salary, out of it. There's a lot of fixed cost that goes out of it. But I really don't know how to measure how my accounts payable function is doing, right? If that's the problem statement your client comes up with, you can even look at the TV of key spends that have happened and probably bifurcate the salaries and look at a certain specific data point to come and suggest and say that, look, give me a solution. First, tell me if you can look at my system and data and tell me whether I can do something better, whether I can achieve a certain amount of efficiency and automation. If that's the problem statement that you come up with, let's look at that example and let's deal for the time being with the accounts payable function and see what we can do. Okay. Right. So if I'm looking at an accounts payable function, right, what am I going to be doing first? If this is the ask that has come to you, right, what would I have to do first? Again, not something very different to what we discussed already. I need to landscape my entire engagement, right? So what do? I would look at the accounts payable as a process, right? What's happening internally? Yeah. Number 2, I need to see who are the people who are involved. Yeah. What kind of people and things like that. 3, technology. What kind of technology am I dealing with? So if I have to landscape an account payable function. Let me just quickly go into this and see if it makes sense, right? So I'm looking at certain specific stuff, right? You have to know first what the organization setup is, whether it's centralized processing or an outsourced function. You could also have an accounts payable function which got outsourced completely, right? So that's one. I look at processes, I look at maintaining supplier details, vouchers, payments, process payments and things like that. A lot of processes that could be there. Key controls. What are my key controls today? Right? Authorization rules, user procedures, system access controls, validation, matching rules and stuff like that. Right? These are things that I would be interested in. Roles. What are the business roles that are there? Technology. What is the kind of technology that's got used? And most importantly, right? How do I measure this whole function? Right? This is the part that I'm really interested in. See, one of the things is speed of processing supplier amendments, invoice processed, invoice processing time, number of payments, period and closure time. What are these? These are the things that the client won't tell you. These are the things that you need to come up with. So, if that is the problem statement that you have got, right? You have to go to your client at the end of the engagement and tell him that, you know, I have achieved something for you, right? You have to tell it in measurable terms, right? Your data has to be precise and it has to be accurate, right? So for that measurement, you need to have a certain KPI defined. How do I, kind of first understand for myself that certain thing has been achieved, and how do I report back to the management saying that you have achieved optimization? So these are the things that would make sense. Speed of processing, what would that be? You will have certain FTEs, right? So your FTEs, you want, say for example, your accounts payable function has 5 users, FTEs that are there. They process 100 invoices a day. What is the processing per FTE per day? Is an information that you can easily gather, right? How do you gather that? Can someone tell me how we can gather that information? If that is my KPI.
Database between that whatever the date of invoice,
Correct.
whatever the system input, when the invoice is processed and when the approval has been.
And the username.
The user.
Absolutely. So once I have that, it's a simple pivot. It's going to tell me how many users have cleared this invoice on that particular day. So with that, I can build a matrix and I can easily automate it. End of the day, give me a dashboard telling me how many invoices have got automated. The second one, supplier amendments. Again, very similar, but your data points will be, your purchase order amendments. It could be your invoice amendments. It could be anything. This kind of data is slightly dicey. You may not have standard reports which would talk about amendments, right? If you are not able to measure this, you have to clearly state to your management that, today you don't have the capability to measure this information, right? Or if you're able to measure it through tables, again, you have to come up with a mechanism to find out this timestamp, date stamp stuff from the backend and the table. Invoice processing time is again, something that you need to measure relatively. Can someone tell me how do you, identify an invoice processing time? It's got to do with timestamp, definitely. One good example would be your document date, entry date and posting date. You can compare that. Entry date, when you create a document, the entry date will start, your timestamp, it will be timestamp. And then when you close it, it could be an indication. But the posting date is something that you can also define. So it is not the exact information, but it is relative. It will give you a very relative information. That's one. Another example could be if you have a release in the system, invoice creation and invoice approval. You can compare the time the invoice has been created and the time the invoice has been approved to kind of relatively measure and say this is the time it has taken. So that is the kind of information that you're looking at there. Period and closure time. Again, for this you have to compare the entry date and the posting date to see when you started the process and when you ended the process, right? So these are all again examples that I gave, but there are many other KPIs that you can actually define internally in terms of how you want to take this forward, right? So now, again, these are all the place in the entire activity. So at the end of the day, what I need to do is also to define what my key objectives are. Let's just go through the key objectives that are there for this automation exercise, right? To maximize processing efficiency. So when I say maximize processing efficiency, what is the data point that I'm looking at? Basically to see what is the invoice per FTE, invoice processing time, and these are the two KPIs I'm looking at, right? To ensure invoices are processed to agreed terms. If that is my objective, what would be my data? It's a two with payment terms, right? If it's a certain net 30 is my payment term and I've paid him on net 45, right? It's a different problem. I'm not complied with the payment terms that are agreed. But interestingly, if my net pay terms is 45 days and I've paid it in 5 days, is there a problem?
Yes, it's a problem.
Why is it a problem?
Working capital.
Absolutely, I'm not supposed to pay. 45 days, what I've agreed, I have to pay it on the 45th day, right? And there is also a compliance angle to it. What is it? MSME vendor. 45 days you have to pay. You can't have a net 60 for an MSME vendor. Your system has to gate it. If you call someone as an MSME vendor, you have to pay him within 45 days of the date of the invoice. You don't pay it, it's a compliance issue. So these are things and data points that you need to actually look at and define this. These are all just examples. So what happens is when I take up this process, I will first define my key objectives that are there, right? And then I have to see whether I am able to extract information for that objective. If I am not in a position to extract information, then having that objective is of no use. You should have a way to measure it. So at the end of the day, after you look at all of this, I need to have reliable KPI. If there is a reliable KPI, then yes, I can have a process objective. So we go back to the client at this stage and say that, look, these are your key objectives and this is how I will measure it, right? So that would logically take you to your ERP. So when you look at your ERP, right, you will have so many touch points within your ERP. Some of the things is what we discussed right now, right? You have your general ledger, you have your purchasing, human resource, project accounting, suppliers, employees, fixed assets register, cash management, group or management team. So these are all the various touch points within your ERP which are relevant to this entire automation exercise. You need data from all of them, right, at the end of the day. So it is imperative for me to first map the people. So first is the process, then the people, the touch points I need to have, and the people will guide me to the modules, right? So this is a map that I would definitely need to do. One example that I would be very interested in is your journal entries. Whether you look at the amount of journal entries that are getting passed and see what is the purpose for which it's getting passed. For example, if you're having depreciation journal entries that are getting passed in an ERP where there is a fixed asset register like in SAP, then you have a problem. Because if you have an FA module, the FA module is supposed to automatically pass your journal entries. If you have any manual JVs there, you need to look at it and find out, and it could relate to an efficiency issue or could relate to something else as well, right? That's an example of it. So you can define what you need to look at basis the entire ambit. So you need to drill down basically from each of this. So what and how do I achieve this efficiency, right? So I have to first map the process which in my opinion is relevant. So what I'm doing first is maintain supplier details, which is basically try to masterize everything which is currently input manually, right? One example could be the MSME thing. If you're not putting it in, then try to masterize it, put it in your vendor master and try to bring it in as a gate. So bring in all the information that you need to maintain into your vendor master, right? So that your transactions could be lesser. That's point number one. Point number two is your process vouchers. So who's going to process your voucher? What is the time scale that you want to process it? And how do I want to process it? In the sense, do I have a release there? Do I have a maker checker there? And all these things you need to decide. Interestingly, in terms of your processing voucher thing, if you are under pressure to reduce cost, you can look at something called RPA, which is robotic process automation. So what it does is there is a requirement to upload the invoice into the system, and you have basically bots that will read what the values are, right? And it will automatically tell you what GL you need to post it. There is only a first time map that you need to do, right? Once you do that, then you will only have checkers to see whether the invoice has been correctly tagged. All this is currently happening in a lot of organizations, right? Classic example, how many of you have looked at Zoho books? No? So Zoho books have a tie-up with ICICI, if you guys know, wherein if you upload the bank statement, once you do it, that is, say for example, you have a client, you are a client, and then you have your clients paying in money into you. You upload the bank statement. The first time you map it, right? Saying this money has come in from this client, so you account it accordingly in Zoho books. Then every time you upload the bank statement, it automatically reads and maps it and uploads it and accounts it. You just have to approve it. So RPA has been brought in at great details, even at accounting level. A lot of companies are using Zoho books and using this feature. You can probably have a look at it and probably recommend to your clients as well. Again, process payments and period end reporting and closing. So this is the process first I would define, right? And what are the process features and what are the system features? So now when I'm trying to achieve the KPIs that I've defined, there are certain things which my process has to do and there are certain things which my system has to do, right? I need to really detail it out. So if I have to, at this point, just stop and map this whole thing, what am I doing really? So I have an accounts payable function, right? So somebody has come to you with a problem to state that bring in efficiencies. That's where they stop. Then you take over. You look at the entire ambit, right? Define the objectives that you want and see whether it is measurable. You draw the KPIs. And then once you draw the KPIs, you first map the process. And then this is where you kind of tell what the process features are and then what the system features are. Let's look at some examples of process features. Authorize and set up new supplier payments, right? Maintain supplier payment details. Segregation of duties between supplier setup, voucher processing and payment processing. These are all process features that should be there for you to enable an automation in that. Accounts payable process vouchers, invoices, expense claims, credit notes, debit memos and prepayment requests. So these are all the different processes which you need to govern, right? So like that, for each of the areas, you need to specify what the process features are. And let's come down to a couple of system features. Single supplier database. Classic example in the sense that what I'm trying to say here is you should not maintain a supplier database in Excel. It has to be a system driven vendor master. And if you're an accounting platform entity and don't have an ERP, this could be a problem, right? You may have a lot of your vendor master details on Excel because it's an accounting platform, it's not an ERP at the end of the day, right? Then your ability to achieve a certain KPI is compromised to that extent. You need to realize that, right? That's one. Single employee database. You cannot have Excels floating between the HR department for various employees. Audit trail for changes to supplier payment details. So any change is made, there has to be an audit trail. Only then you will have an amendment report coming from that KPI again. Purchase invoice transacted via EDI with major suppliers wherever possible. So what it says is don't do cash payments, right? Don't do check payments. Try to do EDI payments at the maximum extent possible. Why? Because when I do my upload, right, I can use the bank statement effectively and map the heuristics and do the automation there. So that will help me, right? So electronic validation and approval of invoices. That's what we spoke about, right? The RPA part. I upload the invoice and have someone validate it rather than data entering it. Automatic matching of invoice to your GRM that anyway happens today in most of the ERPs. Interface with GL, purchasing, fixed assets and project accounting, right? Classic example, you should not have project accounting having a list of payments which are very different to what your purchase order listing is in the system, right? Which means you're not making all the payments through a PO route. You are having certain direct payments as well. When do I do a direct payment? I mean the non-PO route. When do I take the non-PO routes? And can someone tell me when do I take that?
Emergency.
Sorry?
Emergency basis.
Emergency could be one, or where it is a single opportunity. I don't see a future business with them. It's a one-time vendor. I've interacted with them. But if you have continuous, direct payments that are being made, which means that you have not systemized the whole thing. You should have created. You ought to have created a PO for it and then govern the whole thing. So you need to ensure that as well. use of workflow software to resolve queries and monitor process. This is more to handle your vendor, complaints that come through. Why do I need this? When I say vendor workflow, I'm not asking a huge investment. I need to have a channel of communication with my vendor which is documented. Why is this relevant? What efficiency am I trying to achieve here on the KPI front? I can improve my per FTE invoice processing. I can do that because if there is a problem, that FTE will not put the invoice on hold. You would rather talk to him and solve it so that count will increase. The second one is complaints. If there is an MSME vendor, I'm not holding that invoice for a long time. I have to clear it. Just because I have a problem with the invoice, I should not be keeping. Classic example, when GST came in, nobody sent in their GST number, or it was not, the invoice was not in the format that was kind of suggested, right? So you cannot put the invoice on hold. You're supposed to talk to the client, have a ticketing system and resolve it. So have a mechanism for it so that you can improve the per FTE count of processing. So similarly, each one has the end objective as the KPI. So when you put down what are the process features and the system features which are linked to your KPI, it is very clear. What you are doing is you're communicating to the management that look, unless or until you do this, you are not going to achieve any efficiency. So this is basically the bulk of the work that you're doing. So now, when you do this, right, I will be able to identify certain key performance indicators that I have managed to kind of achieve. What are my benchmarks? So delivery of information to general ledger on time, timely delivery of end of period reports. That will be my key performance indicator. What are my benchmarks? I will now be collecting data and churning out information such as invoices processed per FTE, invoice processing time, number of payments per FTE, cost per invoice, right? So that is the end objective of the management. So today you will say, when I began, my cost per invoice is X rupees, and when I did this whole thing, my cost per invoice is so much, because you have managed to cut down costs in between. So that's the benchmark that you use, and these critical success factors are again emanating from your process and system features, wherein you will say, I have achieved all this. And when you give a dashboard like this, at the end of the day, they will be able to appreciate, because there is both data that is coming through, actionable data, and you're also able to establish it through the critical success factors. So this is pretty much how I would probably do it. And to just summarize this whole thing, you need to kind of define what you want at the beginning to kind of achieve what you want at the end, whether it is audit or anything else. So in the context of both, all three parts, not both, sorry, governance, risk and compliance, data assumes a lot of significance. And one thing that I've tried to do today is to give a little bit of flavor from the risk perspective, because it's audit. A lot of people would be interested in audit. Another would be in terms of consulting, which is this, because this is a slightly different animal. There are various outliers and layers to this which I have not told you about, which will be too much. How do I kind of look at data is something else. First I need to know how to look at data, and then drill down to it, right? Like for example, she mentioned R. R is a data mining tool. Once I know what data I want, I will put that data into that tool and kind of take out different sets of statistical modeling that I can do. Regressive tests that I can do, a lot of time series analysis I can do, a lot of things I can do. So I think the significance of the reason why I wanted to show this is because there is an opportunity here for us as chartered accountants, that you can look at becoming data scientists, because we both have the functional knowledge and we also have the business knowledge. It's only the matter of that data science and the tool that we need to kind of link in these two things. It will kind of help you, kind of look at a different perspective and probably monetize this when you come to practice, or if you're in practice already. So I think with that I would like to conclude the session. Thank you so much for patiently hearing out, and I hope there are certain parts I would have rushed through, but the idea was to kind of give a flavor of the entire topic that I wanted to talk about. And thank you so much for hearing me out, and I hope to see you guys sometime later as well. Thanks a lot for hearing me out. Thanks.
Thank you so much, sir.
Well,
In fact, we have learned a lot actually.
thank you so much.
Very good.
Thanks so much. I can also leave you with my email ID, and if you want to get in touch with me, you can contact me at Aditya, ADITYA, at the rate, let me just, one second. This, so you can reach me on my email and my phone number at any point of time. Be happy to. Sorry? Yeah, you want to make it okay? It's okay? All right. Thank you so much.